so you can enjoy the afternoon. My name is Sarah Peltier, and I'm a district wildlife biologist with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. That's the state agency here in Virginia that manages all of the hunting, fishing, and boating recreation. Our agency was once called the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, so most of you are probably familiar of it by that name. In 2020, we changed our agency name, but we still do all the same stuff, and so now we're DWR, or the Department of Wildlife Resources. As a district wildlife biologist, I cover 7 counties. Nelson County is one of those counties, so I spend a fair bit of time up here at Wintergreen dealing with human-bear conflicts. Our local office, the one that I work out of, is in Forest in Bedford County, so I'm not too far away. And I am actually originally from Bedford, so I feel blessed to be back not only in my home state, but working in my hometown. So I'm happy to be here today talking to you about Black Bear 101. Did any of you attend this presentation in September? Oh, good. Okay, good. So all new folks. This is really going to be a lot of information about bears. So hopefully you'll take something away from it, and we'll go ahead and get started. So today I'm just going to cover a little bit about black bear history in Virginia. We'll spend a lot of time talking about biology and behavior because that helps us understand why bears do what they do in terms of coming in conflict with humans. We'll talk a little bit about management, how this agency chooses to manage bears. And then the biggest part will be sort of conflict management, how to resolve and coexist with bears because it is possible. And then we'll finish up with mange, which hopefully you guys have heard about, and we'll talk about it. Okay, this is probably an intuitive question, but what kind of bears do we have in Virginia? Do we have any other kind of bear? Right, we don't. We only have black bears in Virginia. A lot of people sometimes assume that we have brown bears or grizzly bears, but thankfully we don't. Those two names are synonymous. You can call them a grizzly or a brown bear. We only have black bears in Virginia. The cool thing about black bears, although we don't see it very often in Virginia, is they can be more of a cinnamon or brown color. We have that occasionally, bears like that show up in Virginia, but most commonly it's this beautiful all black with a gray or brown muzzle. So a little bit about their history. This is a native species to Virginia, and during European settlement, they were very abundant, found statewide. And just like any game animal, they were hunted to the point where the populations were very small. There were only remnant populations over in the western mountains nearby to us, and then in the Dismal Swamp. They were first listed as a game species in 1930. And black bears are one of our agency's biggest conservation success stories because they have been brought back to an abundant population level found statewide. So we're very proud of that. And that is in part due to the regulations put in place to control hunting so that it is done sustainably so that these populations can survive and thrive for future generations to enjoy. This is what we estimate to be our black bear range, essentially all of Virginia with the exception of the Eastern Shore. So if you're on the Eastern Shore, it's less likely that you would see a bear, but they are found throughout Virginia now at this point, which again would have been their native range. Okay, so let's jump into black bear biology, and this is really the meat and potatoes. I focus a lot on this because if you don't know anything about a bear, it's really hard to understand why they come onto your porch or why you see them in a dumpster. So we're going to talk about that and tie those two things together. Specifically, their senses, their behaviors, their habitat requirements and movements, a little bit about their diet and their reproduction, which is really fascinating, and then hibernation, which we'll talk about. Okay, so a little bit about weight of bears, typically in Virginia. So our males or boars are bigger. So you can often look at a bear and tell sex by the size of the bear, within reason. But males are anywhere from 200 to 500 pounds. The largest in Virginia was 740 pounds. That's a really, really big bear, a very big bear. And then females, also called sows, are typically smaller. They're anywhere from 100 to 250 pounds, but they can be in excess of 300 pounds if they're in really good condition, and usually if they're an older bear. So I show this picture here that bear standing up at the top photo. That's a big male. Of course, this one here on the bottom is a female, and you can not only tell that because she looks slightly smaller, but she has a cub with her. And we'll talk about the mother-cub interactions. And then that photo there is, of course, of a newborn black bear cub. Black bears have 5 long, non-retractable claws. And these are really important for bears. They not only help them climb trees, which they're very efficient at doing, but they also use these claws to dig up insect nests, so like a beehive or an anthill. They really love to tear into fallen down trees, particularly ones that are sort of rotten because there's lots of grubs and bugs in there. They will, of course, use their claws in defense against other bears. And then males in particular use them to mark their territory. So they're called scent post trees. They'll find a tree and they'll rub up against it and they'll scratch it and mark it up and they'll stand up while they're doing it. So it's usually pretty high. And that's leaving that individual bear's scent behind for other bears to come through and find out, ooh, big man lives over here or something. But also it's a visual cue as well with those scratch marks in the trees. Okay, so a little bit about their senses. Bears have comparable sight to you and I. They can see in color, and that helps them particularly in the summer and fall when they're foraging for berries, which we'll talk about. They actually have really poor long distance vision though. Bears have very small eyes, and so they can't see very far distances. And so it's very normal for a bear to stand up to survey its surroundings, a lot like this bear's doing in this photo. It is not an aggressive stance. They're not about to attack you. They're usually simply just trying to get a view of what's coming, or even more so, potentially they're standing up to smell something that's in the breeze. Just like you or I stand on our tippy toes, we heard something far off, so we're like, what's that? A bear can do the same thing. They have acute hearing, very good hearing, but what it really comes down to and what really matters about bears is that they have an unbeatable sense of smell. We know that they can smell from over a mile away, and we also know that their sense of smell is 7 times greater than that of a bloodhound. So if you think of what that breed of dog is capable of doing, you let it sniff a t-shirt or a hairbrush from a lost child, and it'll go tracking through the woods and hopefully ultimately find that individual. It's hard to fathom that. And then you try and think, okay, 7 times greater than that. I can't, it just blows my mind. But that's what we're dealing with. And this is hopefully cueing you into why bears show up at Wintergreen and on your porches. They have something called a Jacobson's organ, which is really cool. I'm going to show you a video. It's just a really short 5-minute TED talk about a dog's sense of smell. But I promise you that it relates to bears and we'll talk about it. It's really, really interesting. Oh no, and there's not sound. Oh. Working early. No. All right, bear with me here, guys. Sorry about that. Pun intended. Pun intended. Oh, I don't know if this is going to work because we're on Zoom.
Zoom, sometimes you have to set up to think of sound.
Yeah, let's see here.
I know, I've already shared it. You might have to reset it.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. Let's see here.
Moving on to the bald eagle.
Yeah. Sorry about this, guys. I don't speaker.
No, that's your.
No, that's just me. It's not what we want.
Use your settings.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to try this, and if it doesn't work, you guys will have to YouTube this video. No. Okay, I'm not gonna fuss and spend more time trying to figure this out. I apologize. It's clearly has something to do with probably being on Zoom. This is a video that's worth your watch. It's a TED Talk about how dogs smell. And I'll explain to you as best I can, although the video does a lot better. When a dog or a bear, for that matter, is taking in a whiff of air, there's this Jacobson's organ in the roof of the mouth. that allows them to process those smells. So if you have dogs or have had one, you know, when you're taking them on a walk and every fire hydrant or tree, they like have to stop at, and they usually go to the bathroom, but they're also just smelling it like crazy. Well, that's because they can tell every animal that's been by it, not only who's been by it, but how they were feeling, meaning their mood, and then what they've recently eaten or what they've recently done. So these are like, the video calls them aromatic bulletin boards. They're just these messages left behind by passersby that dog can pick up on. Bears have a Jacobson's organ as well. So they're putting their nose to the ground, trying to find their next meal, following their stomachs, and they can put their nose to the ground and ignore every other smell. They can ignore the dog that walked by an hour ago, the ants that are crawling there, the grass, and focus on whatever that one scent is that they're picking up. It might be a garbage can that's a mile down the road, and they will just follow that scent until they arrive to it. The really cool thing that they show in this video is that you could have a dog in an enclosed stadium, like a sports stadium, and it can smell a spritz of perfume, the contents of that perfume within that enclosed stadium with all those people in there. So it's just really sort of mind-boggling, biologically fascinating stuff. So if you have time, definitely check it out. I'm sorry that it didn't work here today. And she's not back there, so I'm going to go back to the way my mic was in case I've screwed that up now, because I did change something. So let's go to okay. All right. Okay, sorry for that technical difficulty, but thank you for your patience. Now, so their behaviors. Black bears are really solitary animals. They really just spend time by themselves. Outside of the breeding season and a sow with cubs, they usually are alone. They're very, very intelligent animals, and that goes without saying. I'm sure you all know that. They're very inquisitive, very curious. They want to look into things and seek things out. They are technically what we call crepuscular, which means they're most active at dawn and dusk. Now, with that being said, bears can be active any time of day and really any time of year. But for the most part, they're trying to be in those dawn and dusk hours. In neighborhoods or areas where bears are gaining access to human-provided foods, they ultimately shift their behavior to be almost nocturnal completely because they want to avoid humans, something we're going to talk about, but they want what we leave behind. So the best time for them to get into those food sources is when we're all asleep and the lights are off, and so they can sometimes shift their behavior to be more nocturnal. They are omnivores, which means they eat both plant and animal material, and we'll talk about their diet. They're definitely driven by their stomachs, as some of us are. So a little bit about their habitat requirements. This is just simple, straightforward, just like any animal. They need food, water, cover, and space, and den sites, particularly in winter, which we'll talk about. They are very adaptable, so a variety of habitats works for bears. I think most people assume that bears are a mature forest-dominated animal, and certainly they are found in beautiful, mature hardwood forests. But they also really need early successional habitat, so meaning a forest that has just been clear-cut and is allowed to grow back up. So when your vegetation is more human height, because that allows a lot of cover. People can't see a bear when they're in there, but it also produces a ton of forage that the bear can take advantage of. They love streamside zones because those are usually travel corridors, but they also allow them access to water, and there usually is more shrubby habitat where they can kind of sneak through and be hidden and not seen. A little bit about their movement. So we're in springtime right now. Bears are active. You all saw the sign at the entrance to the resort. Bears total cars is what it says. Keep doors locked. So springtime is a very stressful time for bears because they will have spent the winter, which we're going to talk about, in their den. And so that was a period of time where they weren't eating or consuming anything. And so they wake up, they've lost a lot of weight, and they're very hungry. So these bears are searching for food. They'll make big distances, big movements looking for that food. Female bears will be traveling with their cubs or yearlings at this point. And male bears are just doing whatever they want. They're just solitary. In the summertime, things get better because there's, of course, more natural forage out on the landscape. This is when we have our mating season for bears in Virginia. Those yearlings disperse, they go establish their own territories. And in the fall, which is another very important season for bears, is really when the hunt is on for food. And this is because bears are now transitioning to preparing for winter. So they're trying to pack on the pounds. They're active for longer during the day, up to 20 hours. And they go through something called hyperphagia, where they're just consuming, it's an eating frenzy, trying to get ready for those months where they don't eat anything. Speaking of eating, I mentioned, of course, that they're omnivores. About 75 to 80% of a black bear's diet is vegetative matter. So they really are eating things like new grass, tender grasses, mast, soft and hard mast. And when I say that, I mean hard mast meaning like acorns, beech nuts, soft mast meaning like blackberries, blueberries. They will also eat a bunch of other kind of nuts as well. About 25% of their diet is insects, so they really do love insects. And it's not that they love the honey that bees make. They like the bee larvae itself. The honey is just an added bonus, and of course that smells very sweet, so it draws bears in. They sometimes will eat roadkill if they can come across it and take advantage of it. But again, the meat portion of their diet is very, very small. It's usually just something opportunistically that they can take advantage of. Maybe something like a possum that's very slow moving and easy to capture and kill. Bears, while they are big animals, very intelligent, they're also lazy. So they're not going to expend a lot of effort chasing down an adult white-tailed deer, for example. That's just simply not something they're going to do. This one here in the image is a roadkill that the bear's taking advantage of. But they are smart enough to be lazy. That's why they get into our garbage cans and bird feeders, because those things don't run away from them. So they're not going to take much effort chasing some other mammal down. So I mentioned that fall is a very stressful and important time for bears. During this period, they gain roughly 2 pounds per day if conditions are right and there's a lot of good food availability. They're really searching for those foods that are high in proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, and that's why acorn crop in the fall is really important for bears. In years where we have a really good mast crop, bears do really well. They put on more weight. They don't have to move as much to find food. And we also find that because of that, bear hunters are usually less successful because bears aren't moving as much and being seen by people that are in a tree stand or a blind, for example. Whereas in years where we have a poor mast crop, it's harder for bears to find acorns, so they're making more movements to seek out those food sources, potentially coming in conflict with people or coming across a hunter, for example. In those years, we do see an increase in human-bear conflict. So because there's not many acorns available in the fall, bears have to eat. They're going through this hyperphagia, so you better bet they're going to find it somewhere else, and that might be your bird feeder or your garbage can or dog food, for example. Okay, let's talk about reproduction. This is something that's one of my favorite things about black bears. I mentioned that our mating season in Virginia is in the summer. It's usually June and July, but it tends to lean more towards July. Bears experience something really cool called delayed implantation. Now, what this is in the summertime when bears mate, sperm will fertilize the egg and it'll divide about 200 or so times and form what's called a blastocyst, at which point everything just stops, it pauses. And that blastocyst will just float around in the sow's uterus and it will not implant into the uterine wall and develop until she goes into her winter's den in roughly December. So hence the word delayed implantation. The mating occurs in July, but that implantation doesn't occur until about December. At which point the cubs develop. She might have multiple blastocysts, by the way, and they could be also from different male bears. So sometimes if a sow has 3 cubs, they might not all share the same father. Because during the mating season in July, boars are roaming their territory looking to mate with as many females as possible. So when those blastocysts implant, development happens really fast. The gestation at that point is about 60 days because cubs in Virginia are born usually the end of January, beginning of February, roughly. And they are born in a den, which we're going to talk about. When these guys are born, they are completely helpless. They have very fine, almost no hair. Their eyes and ears are closed. So they depend entirely on their mom to nurse off of her And this is why these guys are born in a den or some sort of shelter. They need to be protected from the elements. They need to just snuggle on mom and nurse from her for a period of time until they're big enough and strong enough to emerge from the den come springtime. Now, cubs, another, I feel bad for sows. These guys spend about 15 months with mom. So they're born in, let's say, January. They emerge from the den, usually in April. They're little teddy bears at that point. They literally look like a 5-pound little thing that you just want to pick up and take home. Now, they'll spend all summer with mom, all fall with mom. They'll den again with her in their second winter, at which point we call them yearlings because they're a year old at that point. So they'll den with her again, and then spring will roll around, and that's when they all wake up and she says, you guys got to go. She gets pretty aggressive, kicks them out, you know, like you're sending your college age kid out of the house, like, come on, come on, come on, come on. It's time for them to go. And that's because bears breed every other year. So she's going to be coming back into estrus and be looking to mate with male bears. And if cubs or yearlings are still present during the mating season with that sow, male bears will kill them. So it's for good reason that she makes them go, okay, it's time to leave. But yearlings are what we call those ones that they're a year old when they den with their mom again. These guys are small bears, of course. By the time it's their second winter and they're called a yearling, they're roughly 60 to 70 pounds at that point. And these guys are often the bears that get in a lot of trouble, especially after that second spring rolls around and mom kicks them out, because they just spent their whole life with mom teaching them what to do, where to go. They're pretty awkward teenagers. They get into trouble because they just don't really know and they're a little lost. They're trying to establish their own home ranges, their own territory. They have big, I tell people, if you call me and you were concerned about a bear you saw, I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and a lot of it has to do with what did the bear look like, how is it behaving. But if you're like, well, it was a small bear, I think it was young. I was like, okay, did it have like big Mickey Mouse ears? This is how I describe yearlings. They've got big sort of radar ears, and that's because as a bear ages and grows, the head size grows, so the ears appear smaller. It's not that the ears themselves are getting bigger or smaller, it's the head size is growing. So if you see a bear, you think it's small, you might consider it a yearling. Well, hey, does it have big radar ears, big Mickey Mouse ears? And then that's probably a yearling. Because again, as the bear grows, the head size gets larger. Okay, so let's talk about this winter hibernation. And I put hibernation in quotes because black bears are not true hibernators. A true hibernator would be something like a groundhog. You could find it in a den in the wintertime and pick it up and be like, wake up, and it's not going to do a thing. It's just out. Black bears are not that way. You could disturb a black bear den and that bear is going to get up and run away from you as quickly as it can. They are much more lethargic though. So their body temperature does drop a little bit, their metabolism does decrease, and of course they don't consume anything, urinate or defecate. So it really is a period of time where they are much, much less active, but they are capable of getting up and leaving the den, particularly when we have very warm winters. We see that bears do that because it's just a warm January or February, for example. They think that, oh, I should get up now, there's probably food, and then they find that there's really not much food. So we see that happen. That entering of dens depends a lot on whether the age of the bear, whether or not it has cubs. So we find that our sows that are pregnant or sows that have yearlings enter the den a little bit sooner, whereas those large dominant males are like the last to go into a den. And in fact, they'll just sometimes spend a couple of weeks in the den, wake up, spend some time foraging, go back to the den, and do this sort of hopscotch sort of hibernation, if you will. In Virginia, our dens, most of our dens are what we call ground nests or ground dens. So it really is just a depression in the ground, whether the bear made it or it was just one that was naturally there that the bear decides to lay down. Bears have a very thick coat, so you might think, oh my gosh, the snow just falls on the bear. How does it stay warm? But they've got such a thick coat, really long, coarse outer hairs that protect them from the elements. Okay, very occasionally in Virginia, we have sort of the classic out west rock cavity dens, but that's not super common in Virginia. We do have tree dens, and in fact, there is one here at Wintergreen. I don't know how often it's used. It's off of, oh, I should have confirmed this before. It's like Fawn Drive. Thank you. Yep. It's right there along the road, and people have photographed bears like peeking out of the big hole at the top of the tree. So they do sometimes use those, but most often it's just a big nest on the ground, and that's what they'll choose to den. They really like pine straw or slash piles where there's been a recent clear cut and there's just a lot of tree debris that's all fallen down over top, and bears can get into really small spaces and they'll just climb under there and choose to make their den in that location. Okay, so just to reiterate, these are not true hibernators. Their body temperature only falls max about 15 degrees. Again, they don't eat, urinate, defecate, and I should have an asterisk there because in those winters where we're pretty warm, we do know that bears get up, and of course they probably are foraging and consuming something. But the point is that they don't have to. They can survive the winter without doing so. Their heart rate does decrease, but they are easily aroused from slumber. And of course, during this period of time is when sows are giving birth to those cubs, usually the end of January, beginning of February. All right, we're gonna switch gears a little bit. These are real photos, by the way. This isn't like AI or Photoshopped. Switch gears a little bit and talk about black bear management. This is probably a scene that it doesn't come to surprise to any of you here at Wintergreen. Bears have an incredible sense of smell, which we've talked about. Things like birdseed does have a very strong scent. It may not to you and I, but to a bear it does. And again, because they're smart enough to be lazy, they've figured out that I can just tear down a bird feeder and get a huge caloric reward with very minimal effort and energy expended. I mean, that's smart, right? Like that makes sense. It's no wonder bears take advantage of these things, but they do. And then as a state agency, we're left to deal with the repercussions of that, because certainly you spent time putting up a bird feeder, investing in bird seed. You love watching the birds. So there's this conflict point at which people and bears come into trouble. Okay, so there are so many things to consider when we talk about how to manage black bears. There's two really important things I wanted to mention: CCC and BCC. So CCC stands for cultural carrying capacity, whereas BCC is biological carrying capacity. So biological carrying capacity is there probably does exist some magic number of bears that the state of Virginia, our habitat, can sustain. We don't know what that number is. Nobody does. If anyone tells you that they know it is, they're not telling you the truth, because it's impossible to know how many bears, the exact number of bears that we let alone have in Virginia or could have in Virginia. But there is some limit at which the habitat itself can only sustain so many bears. Now, there's also this cultural carrying capacity, and that is human tolerance. How many bears can humans tolerate in Virginia or in a particular community, for example? Because again, these guys do come into conflict with us. So we have this hard task of trying to strike a balance between the two. Keep the people of Virginia safe and happy, but also consider that bears need to be healthy and at a level at which they can continue to survive. There are many, many people in Virginia who have a strong hunting interest in bears. It's a traditional recreation here in the state. So that's also something that we have to consider. There's ecological interests. So the impact that bears have on the environment, they're often considered to be an umbrella species, which means if you have the presence of bears, that's a good representation of a healthy forest or a healthy ecosystem, because they can benefit so many other species simply through the seed dispersal that they do in their feces. They eat so many nuts and berries, there's seeds and what have you left behind in those little scat piles, and that perpetuates the movement of plants throughout the landscape. There's also a huge viewing interest. So many people visit maybe even Wintergreen, for example, at the hopes of seeing a bear. Certainly the Blue Ridge Parkway, Shenandoah National Park. The tourism industry around bears is very strong. And then, of course, there's just some aesthetic or historical values. A lot of people just like knowing that bears exist in their woods or in Virginia in general. Bears are very large, charismatic species, so it's no surprise that people take a lot of interest in them. People tend to care about them and how they're doing, their health and safety. But it brings us to, some of this. This is a lot of what the agency deals with. It's a lot of what I deal with, is when humans come close, or when bears come close to humans, the play out of all of that. So The picture on the top right is probably one of my favorites. I tell people this all the time. Bears are big, right? These are big animals. I say that they're lazy. So you sort of picture them like, like through the woods, and they are. But they're also the most agile animals I think I've ever seen. They can stand on, walk on, climb up the smallest things that you think they could never manage, and yet they do. And that standing on that bird feeder is just an example of that. They get into crops. This picture here is of corn. So we deal with a lot of farmers that have ag damage as related to bears, especially in August when that corn is at its ripest and its sweetest. They will smell that corn from far away and go into those cornfields and really cause a lot of damage. Of course, they get into beehives. Again, it's not the honey that they're looking for, it's just the bee larvae itself. They get into dumpsters and trash cans, and then they leave behind often just this wreck of damage, whether it's your torn apart bird feeder or just trash strewn through the woods, and then we're left to deal with it afterwards. Here in Virginia, and I'll reference this at the end again, we do want people to report conflicts that they're experiencing with bears, and we keep track of this every year in a database because we just want, if you don't call and tell us what's going on, I have no clue what's going on. You know, I know there are bears here, but if you don't tell me what you're seeing or hearing or the issues you're having, we'll never know. Over half of these calls, unfortunately, and this drives me crazy as a biologist, are trash related. And it drives me crazy because this is a very addressable piece of the pie. There are so many different things we can do to secure trash so that bears can't get into it. Bird feeders, another huge, very addressable piece of the pie. There are actually ways that you can have a bird feeder and a bear not get into it. Takes a little bit more planning and effort on your part, but it is possible. And then that other slice of the pie there is just sightings, occasionally property damage or concern for safety, and then also those kill permit requests that we might get. Those are associated with the agricultural damage that bears sometimes cause. Okay, this is a really important slide that I always try and include because I think there's always misconception about what DWR does or doesn't do when it comes to black bear management. So thankfully, our approach as an agency has really shifted over time, historically over time. And we have a huge emphasis on education and outreach. We live in bear country. You live in bear country. They were here first. You moved in. Now we need to learn how to coexist because it is possible. So we put a lot of emphasis on that. We give a lot of technical assistance whether that be over the phone or in person. Sometimes we come out and make a site visit because you're having a persistent bear do something or cause damage. We want to figure out what's going on. We want to help you. Sometimes we will also do some on-site adversive conditioning or hazing, scaring bears. That's something that the public is allowed to do and very much encouraged to do. When bears come close to homes and people, we want a couple of things to happen. First and foremost, we do not want them to find any sort of food reward. We don't want them to get into your trash can or your bird feeder, dog food, what have you. And also we want it to be a pretty uncomfortable, unpleasant scenario for the bear so that they don't want to come back and replicate it again. So whether you make loud noises, you honk your car horn, you use bear spray, we'll talk a little bit about the different ways that you can do that. And so sometimes we do come out and try those techniques as well. You know, we might use a non-lethal rubber round in a shotgun. So just as a pain in the rump and the bear runs on. And a very, very thankfully rare last step would be to capture and humanely dispatch a bear that was considered to be a public safety risk. These are bears that are approaching people looking for food, breaking into homes over and over again. Thankfully, these things don't happen all that often. A huge question that we get all the time is people will call our agency and say, oh, a bear got into my bird feeder last night. You got to come trap and remove it. And thankfully, now at this point, we say, no, let's talk about why it got into your bird feeder and how we can fix that. Historically, though, this agency and many other state agencies did do a lot of relocation. So people would literally just call and complain about a bear that got into their unsecured trash can. We would run out there, set a trap, catch it, and drive 60 miles down the road. There was never any set standard to maybe the national forest and let the bear go. Hopefully you guys are putting together already in your head why that's not a good, they come back. And we actually have put GPS collars on bears that we've relocated and literally watched them. It can take a couple of weeks, maybe a month. They just beeline straight back to where they were. So if the reason that the bear showed up to begin with has not been addressed, you didn't care to secure your garbage or take down your bird feeder, you're going to have your problem all over again. And certainly when you remove a bear, other bears can show up. It's not just one individual bear that usually is causing conflict. When bears are relocated, they do make those huge distances to get back, and they are crossing roadways, getting struck by vehicles. And certainly a bear that was getting into bird feeders at location A, you move it to location B, it's going to try and get back for sure, but it's going to cause the same problems in location B as well. So it's just simply something that we no longer do. This is not an option. So if you call and ask, the answer is no. Instead, it's what can you do? How can you change your behavior so that this bear doesn't become more of an issue and learns to be a wild bear as it should be? So on our website, we have so many different resources about how to prevent conflict with bears. A lot of it is, your small residential trash cans, which I know isn't much of an issue up here at Wintergreen, but we have ways that you can secure that. All the way up to the dumpsters that hopefully you all know have locking mechanisms and bars now to hopefully keep bears out. Of course, there's trash compactors. Bears love pet food, so a lot of people feed cats outside or their dog outside, and those are huge attractants for bears. Bears also love apple trees, any sort of fruit trees. Occasionally they'll get into grapevines. They love beehives, of course. So we have a lot of information about how to change your behavior to secure these attractants such that a bear can't get into them. Electric fencing is something that works really, really great against bears. And there's no sound on this video, so we hopefully shouldn't have any problem. This is from Alaska. Those are brown bears. So again, brown bears, but you can get the concept of electric fencing. This is actually around a landfill in Alaska. And that bear has a collar on it, a GPS collar, by the way. Yeah. Nope. Nope. So you see his back leg is a little locked up there, still like, oh geez. So this is meant to just be a quick, if anyone's ever touched an electric fence before, you know what this feels like. It's not pleasant, but it's just a quick sort of, yeah. But I like to show this because, I think a lot of people are afraid of electric fencing because certainly you don't want people just walking up to it and touching it, or children for that matter. But it is such an effective deterrent for bears, especially if you have something that, like a beehives, for example, or maybe a small stand of fruit trees that you really want, you've put a lot of resource and money into, you want to protect. This is a good way to go about doing it.
They learn.
They do learn, yeah. So good questions. Because bears are so intelligent, and that's why I referenced the hazing that we'll talk more about. When they have any sort of negative, painful interaction, whether it be with a fence or a human, that's not something that the bear is going to want to do again. So they do remember that, and they won't try and come back to it. They certainly wouldn't walk right back up to it and stick its nose on it, yeah. Because it's just not pleasant. You wouldn't want to do it either. But the most important thing, I swear, these are real photos. Another landfill picture. The biggest thing, the biggest takeaway for you guys about bears is managing garbage. That you saw that was the biggest piece of the pie. This is really what bears get into the most. So this is the best way to minimize any conflicts with bears. Now there is, yeah. That's what you want to see. That's very normal bear behavior. When they see or hear you, they just want to be gone. They don't want to be in your presence. So you like to see bear butts running away. At least I do. There are two terms that we use a lot in bear management that are really important. A habituated bear or habituated wildlife, probably you've heard that term before, just means that they're accustomed to people. Now, that's not necessarily all that bad. That just means that it's a bear that's used to seeing people or hearing people. It sort of meanders and roams Wintergreen. It's just used to humans. But if you add on top of that a food conditioned bear, which means that bear associates people with food, those two things, habituation and food condition, could be a potentially bad combination. Because you've got a bear that's not only beginning to lose its natural fear of humans. So it's becoming more comfortable around humans. But then it's also seeking humans out for food. Not like, I want to eat you. It's just, oh, if I walk up to you, you'll hand me a donut. If I walk up to you, you'll hand me a donut. They don't know the difference between humans, that one person would and one person wouldn't, but they just know that a human means food. And so those bears will approach people looking for food. And that's not a scenario that we like to see because these are big animals and they don't need to be walking up to humans. And it's also not natural in their behavior to do so. Just so you know, in Virginia, and you don't need to worry about reading this whole code, this is a code of Virginia. It is illegal in Virginia to feed bears. Now, it's illegal both intentionally and unintentionally. So intentionally meaning I go out in my backyard and dump out a bag of corn so that the bears come and I'm taking pictures and videos of them. Maybe I'm even hand feeding the bears. That's intentional feeding, illegal. You can be fined and given a ticket right away. Unintentional feeding is, however, that you had a bird feeder out and a bear got into it. And then you decided not to do anything about it. I'm going to keep putting my bird feeder out, or I'm not going to secure my trash. Or I'm going to keep feeding my cats outdoors. And a bear is getting into that food. You are breaking Virginia law because you're feeding bears. And in those instances, you would be issued a warning first. And if it continued after that point, you'd be potentially given a fine and written a citation. So we try and use the warning as an education tool because you might not have known or realized until, of course, you called and reported it that a bear was getting into whatever it was getting into. So we really try and give people the benefit of the doubt, but you better bet if you keep doing it and you don't change your behavior, we're going to tell you you're breaking the law and make sure that you understand that, because we take this so seriously, because those habituated and food conditioned bears are usually considered a public safety risk, and then someone like me has to come in and trap and kill it. And I'm killing it because you all weren't doing what you needed to do. Nothing against the bear. And that's a really sucky thing to have to do. Thankfully, it's pretty rare, but you should know that occasionally we do have to do it. And we've certainly killed plenty of bears at Wintergreen for humans' mistakes. So it happens. All right, now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about how you should interact with bears if you see one. If you see a bear, I should ask, how many of you have seen a bear before? Okay, everyone. All right, that's great. If you see one, and this really doesn't matter distance-wise, but certainly if you're within a close distance to a bear, you just want to back away slowly. You should never, ever run from a bear. And that's true for any wildlife for that matter. When you turn your back and start running, you look more like prey. And now it's like a game and I'm going to chase you. If anyone has a cat at home, if it's an active cat, I should say, if you throw like a little ball or mouse across the floor or something, what's the first thing that cat does? It chases it down and pounces on it, right? So that's just this predator-prey innate behavior that all wild animals and domestic have. So never turn your back, don't run. Instead, you want to back away slowly. What I tell people to do is if you're in really close proximity to the bear, maybe you walked out on your deck, you didn't know it was there, you both are startled. You know, those are the situations where it's best to remain calm. Maybe put your arms above your head and wave them back and forth. And at the same time, I'm backing away, and you usually want to say something. So like, hey bear, and you're moving away. You're making your presence known. And by putting your arms above your head, you're also making yourself look more dominant, more threatening, like you're the bigger animal in this scenario. And most bears, as soon as they hear and see you, they're gonna be like, crap, and like flee. You know, they really want nothing to do with us. If for some reason that tactic isn't working and the bear is just sort of still standing there, or maybe it does start to walk towards you, that's when you need to be a little more aggressive. So maybe clapping your hands, throwing something. If you're on your deck, like grab a chair, you know, whatever you have around you to make yourself feel more comfortable while still making every attempt to retreat back into a vehicle or your house or what have you. But in most cases, the bear is going to see you and hear you and want nothing to do with you. Oh, and I'll add, because I don't have a slide about it, there's a saying, if a bear ever makes physical contact with you, which is thankfully very, very, very rare, they say if it's black, fight back. So if a bear, God forbid, comes up to you and scratches you or bites you or something, you need to fight back with whatever means you have necessary. Don't know what that would look like. Can't speak from experience, but I'd be punching, kicking, pulling, I don't know, whatever you had to do. But if they say if it's black, fight back. If you ever spend time out west, they say if it's brown, you lay down. So there's differences between the species, but we don't have brown bears in Virginia, so forget I ever said that. All right. There you go. Sure. Yeah. Find the next person to be like, ah, that works. Okay. So scaring or hazing bears. This is, again, I mentioned that the public is, we encourage the public to do this. I love to hear when people scare or harass bears, as long as they've done so safely. This is really, really great. Because again, we don't want bears finding a food reward. And when they get on our decks, for example, we don't want them to be something that they do all the time, because that's not normal bear behavior. So you can just simply use your human dominance. Get out your mean, scary voice and just yell. Any sort of noisemaker. So an air horn is something really small that people can carry with them. Will whistle, again, honking your car alarm. How many of you have heard of bear spray? Yeah, a good number of you. Okay, so that's that canister there in the bottom right. This is, again, just like the electric fencing, this is a tremendous tool. And on the next slide, I'll talk about it. A paintball gun. Something that's pretty affordable, fun to shoot. You can use that. Again, it's just causing a little bit of pain to the bear. The only thing we ask, just like if you were using the non-lethal rubber rounds, which again are also very legal, is that you don't aim for the head, right? So you don't want to be hitting an eye. You know, you're aiming for the big muscle mass areas, the shoulders, the rump. Slingshots. People also sometimes use motion activated sprinklers or motion activated lights. What I will tell you about both of those things, specifically the lights, is those don't have any pain associated with them. So bears tend to get used to them pretty quickly. A lot of you probably have motion activated lights on your decks or around your house. Those work well on young bears or a bear that's never encountered it before, but after a period of time, they'll be like, oh, that light kicked on, and then they're like, okay, nothing's happening. So I can keep doing and going where I'm going. Okay, so using bear spray. Now this is something that's easy to get a hold of. You can order bear spray off Amazon. I think it's like $30 for a canister. It's about yay big. It is a hugely effective deterrent, and in fact, it's more effective than a gun. So a lot of people who spend time out west carry. It's almost required that you carry these for brown bears, and they have saved people's lives. The nice thing about bear spray is that you don't necessarily have to be close to the bear for it to be effective, because it sprays out to within 25 feet. And if wind direction is in your favor, that's going to help you even more. But speaking from experience, if wind direction is not in your favor, you know, you're going to get some of that back in your face. And this is very similar to pepper spray that law enforcement officers carry. It is slightly stronger, so a little more painful. But you ultimately will be fine if some of it blew into your face. It's just uncomfortable and painful for a couple of hours, and then it's gone. Same thing for the bear. It's just painful and uncomfortable for a short period of time. It distracts the bear from whatever it was doing in that moment, and they immediately have to go take care of themselves and run off. It sprays out really fast. So it's a really, really good tool to have. If you're someone who is concerned about bears here at the resort, or you see a lot, or you like to walk a lot at dawn or dusk, you know, thinking about something like an air horn, a whistle, or bear spray would be a really good tool to have in your toolkit. The one thing I will tell you about bear spray is really important. If you ever buy any, make sure you know how to use it. There's a safety mechanism on the canister itself that has to be removed before you can press down and spray, which makes sense because you just don't want to be spraying this stuff anywhere and everywhere. So just make sure you familiarize yourself with how it works, or else you might find yourself fumbling with the bear spray in a moment when you'd want to have been able to use it. So just keep that in mind. All right, I think I only got 2 more slides here. You guys are hanging in with me. So how many of you have heard of mange and bears? Okay. How many of you have seen a mangy bear here at Wintergreen? Yeah, good number of you. All right, well, that makes sense given this map. We unfortunately are seeing an increase in sarcoptic mange in our black bear population. Now, mange is a parasitic disease caused by a microscopic mite, and this mite burrows into the skin of an animal, causes an infection, inflammation. They start to lose hair. They become very itchy, and they also will get thickened, sort of crusty looking skin. Sarcoptic mange is something that's been on the landscape for millennia. This is not a new disease, although it is admittedly new in severity in our black bear population. But coyotes, foxes always have mange. It's just something that runs through those populations. This form of mange is also the same mite that causes scabies in humans. So if you were to hug a mangy bear, which I never recommend, you could potentially get those mites onto you and then develop scabies, which thankfully in humans, scabies is very treatable. Just really takes some topical cream is all it needs. But this was first detected in '94 up in Northern Virginia, up in Frederick County, so way up in here. And we've seen sort of this slow but yet accelerated geographic spread of mange, sort of essentially down the Blue Ridge, but you can tell that it's spilling out onto either side, of course. Mange is very much present in Nelson County right now, not just at Wintergreen, just throughout the county. We're getting reports now in Botetourt and Bedford. You can see some over there in Cumberland and Amelia. So this is something that's here to stay, very likely. The good thing I will say about mange is that we do know that some bears recover. And that may have something to do with that bear's genetics. The time of year that it contracts mange probably has a lot to do with it, because you can imagine if you caught mange in like September, October, that's probably not going to bode well for the winter time if you're losing hair and it's colder outside and there's less food and forage. We don't truly know the mechanisms yet why some bears do recover and others don't, but we do know that that happens. The biggest thing to know about mange, and any wildlife disease for that matter, is excuse me, any congregation of wildlife or bears is not good, because now you've got bears coming to physical contact with one another, and that does spread mange. Mange is also unfortunately spread indirectly. So those scent trees I mentioned, if a mangy bear goes and like rubs up on a tree, there's a potential that those mites go onto the tree, and then another healthy bear comes by, rubs up on the tree. It could get mange that way. Probably most often it's direct contact transmission is what's spreading this, but we also know that the mite can persist in the environment. So there's a potential that bears are picking it up that way. So just know to eliminate, just like anything with the human side of all the conflict, is just don't allow bears to congregate, whether that's at bird feeders or dumpsters or trash cans. We are doing a bunch of research currently with other states. So if there is a good thing about this, other states are experiencing the same thing. Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and also some states out west. So we're not alone in like what's going on, but there's still a lot more that we have yet to learn, unfortunately. So we have had to dispatch some severely mangy bears up at Wintergreen. So we have had to do that here. And when I say severe, I mean bears that are severely emaciated. So we're talking a bag of bones, essentially. You can see their ribs, their hips, their shoulders, they literally look like a skeleton. And then of course, they usually have some varying degree of that crusty, thickened skin and hair loss. Those bears, unfortunately, are not going to recover. And the best thing for them in those cases is usually to end the suffering humanely. And so we've had to do that in every county practically where we've got it. But again, some bears do seem to recover better than others. We don't know why, but it clearly depends on something. The one thing I will mention, I mentioned scabies in humans. Sarcoptic mange is also the same kind of mange that your dog can get. So a lot of people are concerned about their pets. As long as you treat your pet with your monthly flea and tick meds, whatever brand that is, you're fine. There's no concerns. Those meds treat mange. If you ever have a mangy bear that was, let's say, laying on your deck or underneath your deck or somewhere on your property, and it seemed like it was frequenting there or spending a lot of time there, you can spread diatomaceous earth on that location, and that'll kill the mites. You could spray something like DEET as well. So there are ways to disinfect a location in which a mange bear had frequented. But if you ever find yourself in that scenario, it's best to call DWR, and we'll walk you through what that looks like or how to do it. But also we want people to report mange sightings so that we can better keep track of where it's going, and see what we can do about it. Okay, last thing I wanted to say, I've already mentioned our website. Please visit it. We have tons of information about bears. If you don't remember to visit our website, an even better one, and I can say this, I guess, is bearwise.org. It's a tremendous, tremendous website that all southeastern states are using, so that if you travel to the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee or you come up here to Wintergreen, you're hearing the same things about bears, the same message, and that's that, you know, we can coexist. Here's a way to mitigate conflict. There's a really great book, if you really love bears and you want to learn even more, by Linda Masterson. A really good read. If you know someone who's a bear lover, this would be a great gift to give someone. It's a really, really good book. When we talked about the piece of the pie, those calls that we get, that's through our wildlife conflict helpline. So this is a number that you should definitely save. It's also on some of the information that I brought with me today. It is staffed Monday through Friday during business hours. They do have a voicemail, so if you call after hours, you can leave a message, or on the weekends. But it's staffed by biologists like myself that are there to help understand what's going on with your conflict with wildlife. This is not just a bear phone number. You can call about snakes, vultures, it doesn't matter, anything wildlife related. But they're there to give you technical assistance to record the report in our database, and then most certainly pass it along to staff should it need additional follow-up if it were something more severe. So that wildlife conflict helpline is really important. And with me today, I brought a couple different things. I've got speaking of Bearwise, they've created these really great flyers about living in bear country, what you should know. So feel free to look through these and take one. If you are any of you guys you rent out your property when you're not here, you guys are full-time residents? Okay. Well, there's a really good one about vacation, because there's so many properties up here are rentals. So we've got people coming to Wintergreen that maybe don't even know there are bears here. They're not coming from a black bear state. And unfortunately, those folks sometimes are culprits in terms of doing the wrong things. So we've got a really good flyer. If you know people who want to post this on their fridge, for example, or in their guest welcome book, a really good thing about vacationing in bear country. This one is a really great, all-encompassing, everything you should know about these kinds of attractants that bears get into, so sort of how bear-wise are you. And then I brought our Living with Black Bears brochure. Another really great thing to pass out if you know people who need to learn something. It's got that wildlife conflict helpline number on the back. And then if you're really interested in mange, and this is slightly outdated at this point in terms of the geographic spread of mange, but another pamphlet about mange. Do you guys have any questions for me? Happy to take questions, clarify anything.
How tall is a bear when it's standing on the platform?
Good question. So a male can be, well, it depends on how big the bear is, but males could be 6 foot when they stand up. Female is probably, 5 foot, but it varies. Yeah. Yeah.
How about injuries from bear-human encounters? Are there any in Virginia?
There have been physical encounters with bears and people in Virginia. Gosh, it's just a handful. And thankfully, most times, unfortunately, they were dog involved. So someone let their dog out, didn't know the bear was there. The dog and bear started to get into a tussle because dogs and bears just don't like each other. And then the human tries to save Fluffy, inserts themselves into the scenario and gets bitten or scratched that way. We have not had any predatory attacks in Virginia, meaning like a bear just is following you and tackles you from behind. You never knew it was there and just wants to eat you. That's not something that we see. So yes, we have had a couple. It's a handful. It's rare, and most of them have been somewhat explainable from the bear side in terms of their behavior, but none were fatal. Thankfully, all minor injuries. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're coexisting with a very large male bear.
Okay.
And very lazy.
Yeah.
Very lazy.
Yeah.
Dogs run up to him, he doesn't care. Very lazy. But when does it come? We don't really bother, except for trying to get in the house.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
He's climbing up to get into the second floor window.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So he's very lazy.
Yeah.
He doesn't really bother us, but we are having to, coexist with him.
Right.
When does it get to your point where you're like, okay, like maybe.
Sure. It's a good question, and it's hard to it's hard to know, like, where is that fine line? What I can tell you from experience is, so like that large bear, the reason it's doing what it's doing is because it has been successful at some point, maybe multiple times, in getting into a home and receiving a food reward from within that home. So it doesn't know, just like it doesn't know the difference between human to human, it doesn't know the difference between home to home. So it can try entering anybody's home because it knows that it did that before successfully. It was a positive experience because it got to eat out of the fridge or whatever. And so it wants to try that again and again and again and again. Those bears, also speaking from experience, are really hard to catch because I guess maybe they're lazy, but they're also smarter because they've figured out how to get into things, whether it be vehicles or homes. So in those instances, those are the cases where it's just really important that people are reporting what's happening. You know, we do want to know if a bear enters a home, because not because we want to immediately come out here and kill that bear. I can probably guarantee you that's not what we're going to do. But we want to figure out, if we can, anything about the bear, size or sex. Does it really only frequent one road? Sometimes we see that they're really only wreaking havoc on Fawn Ridge, for example. So there, you know, we just need to know that information so that we can help folks, because we don't want bears breaking into homes. They cause damage. That's not anything anyone wants to deal with, and it's not what bears should normally be doing. I think also, speaking from experience in those examples, is particularly up at Wintergreen, people will come home if they've been gone for the weekend, or maybe they were gone for the day, and they realize that a bear had been in their home, but we have no idea what bear it was. And the last thing we want to do is set a trap, catch a bear, and kill the wrong one, because there are so many bears up here. So we have to do some more investigative work, I guess, is my point, in figuring out who's doing it. Can we, if it's strategic in only a couple of houses, we have tools to secure those houses. We have something called unwelcome mats that we use a lot of times. So it all comes down to just reporting that information is probably the best. I hope that answers your question. Okay. So it's my understanding that if you call like dispatch here at Wintergreen, that they do have the ability to transfer you to our helpline. So you might have to ask them to do that specifically, or certainly after you notify Wintergreen PD, you can hang up and call the helpline. So whichever option will work best for you. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up to the situation. So when she said, and I don't mean this to put you on the spot, but if you're cohabiting with this bear, are you supposed to be then using things like air horns or?
Right, and
to make it uncomfortable?
sure. And it may be, yes, I would absolutely recommend that people do that, but it might also be that no one's home at the time that the bear's doing it, and then you can't. So
I'm assuming they're seeing it, but maybe.
yeah.
He's not afraid of loud noises.
Mm.
Because I've been this far from him.
Yeah.
Screaming my head
He's just
off,
unfazed.
and he is not fazed by it.
Yeah.
So I just ordered some bear spray.
Good, good.
Sitting here.
Yeah. Give it a try. I mean, and yeah. Kudos for you for being willing to put up with this, because you're right, there is a line, there is a level at which you're fed up, and
I'm not breaking into.
yeah, right.
Yep,
yep.
You know,
Yep, I hear you.
I don't want to upset anybody.
Right.
You know.
You're trying to do your part, be a good person in bear country. Yeah, yeah.
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 The neighbor.
Yeah.
But and he's very lazy.
Yeah.
He doesn't care, but he is very big.
Yeah.
And when he stands up on his back feet, I mean, he's as tall as.
Nice. Okay. There you go. Yeah, that makes sense. The large males that are older, they are lazy and they just don't care.
He does.
And yeah. Yeah. So I wonder if pain is an element that's missing with this bear. So whether that's the non-lethal rubber rounds, a paintball gun, bear spray, an unwelcome mat, electric fencing. You know, in those instances, I always wonder, could that be the thing that's missing that would make the difference? Or there are some bears that even won't faze them. So time will tell. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, great question. Never keep your food where you're sleeping. So don't ever have your cooler or your food, nothing in your tent with you. Always pack that away, whether it's in a locked vehicle. Of course, nowadays they make these like bear impossible to get into totes that you can put food into. A lot of, if you're a true backcountry hiker, a lot of people string food up into a tree where a bear can't even get to it. But the most important thing is not mixing food with where you're sleeping, so that at night, if a bear smells the fried chicken that you have laying beside you in your tent, you know, that's what they want to investigate. But otherwise, when you're camping, you're just making noise. You might have a campfire, you're talking to folks. You're not leaving your grill out overnight, or the cooler just sitting on the tailgate. You know, those are the reasons a bear would come into a campsite, is just the unsecured stuff that you leave behind. So just being very mindful of cleaning up your campsite before bed, not taking any of that food or the food waste into the tent. And just, no, unless it's one of those habituated and food conditioned bears. Those bears might do it. They don't care that you're sitting there because they think you are going to provide them their next meal. So those are the bears that will just wander right up in the middle of the day to someone sitting at a picnic table. But in general, thankfully, we don't see that very often. Yeah, they want that picnic basket. So good question, though. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, so grills are one of everyone has grills on their deck, and they are an attractant for bears. They're a visual attractant, because once a bear, because they're so smart, the first time they get into anything, a bird feeder or a grill, and they got a food reward, they know what that looks like the next time, the shape of it. Sometimes I see bears like get into stuff on people's decks that aren't a grill but look like a grill, and it's like, oh, maybe it thought it was a grill. But the biggest thing that we recommend is if you have somewhere else you can store it, that would be ideal, like a garage or a lockable shed. But if not, just being mindful of cleaning it after you've used it, so that there's hopefully not as much of that odor and residue left behind, because that is, of course, what draws them in. Yeah. 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 You know, no, from my experience, no. And I've had people tell me that they have like a fenced in yard with dogs or whatever, and that bears will like never go near it, and they attributed it to the pet waste. I've also heard of people putting pet waste in their trash can, their like individual trash can, and then a bear doesn't get into it. But so they're not attracted to it, at least not from my experience. And in fact, I've had people tell me that they think it was a deterrent. I wouldn't hold a lot of weight to that, because I think if a bear is hungry enough, it's not going to care. So a lot of times the presence of dogs barking is a good deterrent for bears. Other bears are unfazed. Probably this large male, I bet if a dog's barking at it and you said they just don't care. Some bears are weird like that, but in general, the presence of a loud barking dog can usually scare a bear away. But with the waste, I don't think it attracts bears. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it simply a rumor that you treat mange by putting medication in the food?
It's not technically a rumor. So the way that you could treat mange in bears, and the way we treat it in like cats and dogs, is with ivermectin. You've probably heard of that drug before. So people have taken it upon themselves to do what you just said. It's illegal to do so in Virginia. So you'd be breaking the law by treating wildlife with medication. The issue with treating bears, and the reason why as a state agency we have not taken the stance of treating mange bears, is because that dose of ivermectin requires a second dose. So the feasibility of catching a bear twice over the span, it's about 2 or 4 weeks in between the dosages is what you need to do in order to resolve the infection entirely. It's just impossible. So yeah, we do not treat bears. Thankfully, we have been able to show that untreated bears resolve mange on their own, but again, we don't really know why. So, but it's a good question. I have heard of people doing that, but it is against the law. I don't recommend it, because you're attracting a bear to your house, even though you might have good intention because you're giving it a dose of ivermectin, for example. But that simply goes against everything that we try and teach with, keeping bears from even coming close to your home. But good question.
You guys ever tag bears, track them?
We do, yeah. We have, we'll occasionally put out GPS collars. We have a project right now in the Piedmont, so, sort of the Appomattox, Buckingham, Farmville sort of area where we are trying to capture sows to put GPS collars on them. And the reason we're doing that is for many reasons. We learn a lot about their movements, their habitat use, but also in the wintertime, we can locate those females' dens and foster orphaned cubs in the den with her if she already has cubs of her own, rather than the nice thing in Virginia is you've heard of the Wildlife Center of Virginia in Waynesboro. That's the only place that can take truly orphaned black bear cubs, and they do a great job. They keep them for about 6 months or so until they're a yearling, and then we release them back in the wild. But in this fostering program that we have, well, it's just we prefer that they're raised by a wild bear. So it's a really cool program. So yes, we do put GPS collars out on occasion, and that project in particular is to potentially foster cubs. Yeah. Yeah.
With when it's milder,
Mm.
are the mama bears, what about the males? What about winter hiking?
Yeah, so if it's a warmer winter, we do sometimes hear that bears delay going into a den, or they wake up a little bit earlier from their den and they can become active. What I'll say is that it doesn't seem to ever be all of the bears all at once. It's just as occasionally it's usually a male. It's not going to be those females that just have given birth because they're so dependent on her. She's not going to leave the den. So if we have a warmer winter and you see a bear that's active, my guess is that it's probably a male and he just triggered in him, the temperature increased. Oh, maybe now's the time to wake up. And usually, and most times, the bears wake up, do get up, they start walking around, they realize there's not much natural forage for them available, and they'll go back and lay down. They sort of take these little soirees to like check and see if food is available. And unfortunately, in those instances, if people have bird feeders out, that bear will find that food reward and think, oh, okay, I can eat this and I'll go back to bed and then maybe I can wake up again and eat that. So it's not. They would go back to the same exact den site, but again, it may just be for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of days, because they are very capable of being active and flushing from a den, for example. So they would retreat back to wherever it was that they came from. It's just a matter of how frequently are they going to come out to check and see if food is available. And I think that is driven by warmer days. But hopefully that bear is smart enough to realize that there's not much naturally available for me, and hopefully the community in which it's coming out into doesn't have food available for it, that it's like, oh, I've got to go back to bed. There's nothing to eat, and they will. Yeah.
Mentioned the mouse ears.
Yeah.
Is there something with their heads or something where you can tell the difference between a male and female, like the leaves?
Yeah, you can. I think you can at least. So male bears tend to have, especially as they get older, but in general, they tend to have sort of a bigger, blockier, sort of like a pit bull style head is how I like to call it. Just meatier, just a bigger head. Whereas the females tend to have a more slender, fox-like looking muzzle. So yeah, you can sort of use that as, because there is an age at which all bears look the same. Sort of when they're in their sub-adult years, 3 to 5 years old, they're all sort of about 200 pounds. And you're like, I can't tell what you are. That's where you could look at the muzzle. If it looked more feminine-like, is sometimes how I put it, then it's probably a female. If it looked like big and bulky, it's probably a male. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So our bears don't migrate.
No, they do not. They're here year round. Yep, they're here year round, and they have a home range that they live within. And home ranges in Virginia, males usually have bigger home range, maybe about 15 square miles. So there's 641 acres in 1 square mile. So they have very large areas that they roam and that there's their established territory. But yeah, they stay within that. They don't migrate. They don't leave Virginia. They're here year round. It's a good question. Oh, well, I mean, you might be thinking that because their home ranges are so big. I mean, bears can be from ridge top to ridge top to ridge top.